all we're doing is we're masking this. We're learning something, but if we're not addressing the thing that is keeping me attached to what it is that's causing me to be here in the first place, it's all going to be temporary. That is why diets, do they work? Yes. Am I a fan of them? Sometimes, right? Sometimes they can work very well for people. Are they sustainable long term? No. Are they sustainable for people's lifestyle or change? No. Why? Because it doesn't address the core root.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, folks. Audley Stevenson back for another edition of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and I appreciate you for being here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. As always, I encourage you to connect with us on our social media channels. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under the handle The Audacious Pod. And then if you head over to YouTube, if you're watching this episode on YouTube, then you know there's a little bell down below that you can tap, ding, 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 and that way you can stay connected to all good things audacious related. Now, the topic of conversation on this episode of the podcast is all centered around weight loss. It's a universal topic that every single one of us has encountered or struggled with at one point or another. So if you're hearing this, you absolutely are not alone. And I'm glad that we're not alone, because David Hernandez, who's a freedom and wellness expert, he's a coach, he's a speaker, and he's on the program and breaks away, and he'll talk about his method, because it very much breaks away from the traditional weight loss methods that we know, the diet, so on and so forth. He takes a totally different approach, and he helps his clients by helping them understand the root causes to why they struggle with their weight loss goals, and how we can break unhealthy patterns in our lives and step into and steps that we can do to change our relationship with food, because it's our relationship with food for many of us is a trigger. And so we'll definitely dive into that a bit deeper with David. He really feels by taking these approaches and being very deliberate with our actions, we can get to the heart of the matter and getting us on that path to achieving our weight loss goals. It's a really great chat, and I'm sure a lot of you will take some insightful stuff from that you'll all appreciate. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with David Hernandez. Enjoy. Hey, David, it is awesome to have you joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time and hanging out, man. It's a lot of fun.
It's my pleasure, my man. It's great to be able to connect with an individual that's passionate about what he's doing and is just driving that right through what he speaks and shares it with his audience. So thank you so much for this platform, because you're doing a great job. I appreciate the opportunity.
It was very important from the onset. Anything I did, it was something that I was passionate about. It was important to me that it mattered. I think back real quickly, this kind of started during the pandemic, and I wanted something of value to be able to sort of give back and offer. And, after a bit of soul searching, if you will, I sort of landed on this arena, and here we are. So
awesome.
Enjoying the ride, and I think it's been really. I feel as much as I've given, I feel I've gotten so much out of it myself. So we'll keep this going. I don't want to talk about my arena anymore. I want to talk about your space that you play in a lot, because you are dedicated to helping individuals live a little bit. We talk about living our best audacious lives on the podcast. You help them live their own best lives with their own weight loss journey. Right. I wonder if you sort of could talk about sort of the work you do and sort of what landed you there. How did that start for you?
Absolutely. I take a different approach because I think we all hear about a lot of this information, right? And what I like to do is really get to the core of what is causing people to stay stuck in their current life.
Okay.
When we look at things we do, they're known as patterns or they're known as behavior.
Yes.
And it's important to reflect and look at, well, what is causing me to stay stuck in this particular behavior pattern that I'm in? Because if we don't address and we don't focus on the cause, we're not going to be able to uproot it or eliminate it to then cause a shift, right? That is really ultimately what I think we all desire. Because
Yeah.
when we're talking about health, right, it's about longevity, it's about a lifestyle, it's about how can what I do influence everything, because the reality of it is health influences everything that we do.
That's right.
Without it, we're limited. Without it, we can't perform at our optimal level. Without it, we can't enjoy life. We're struggling with energy. We're struggling with performance. We can't think correctly. We can't function. We're emotionally unstable. And when we don't have a handle on that to identify what is it that's causing me to stay in this current position that I want to get out of, look, it's just going to send us on a big roller coaster.
Right.
Right. And it's going to send us on a life of unsatisfaction because we're trying to
Yes.
chase something that we truly desire, but we're not ultimately going to fully get there. And
Yeah.
what I say is that the desire or the want
Mhm.
isn't always enough,
Right. Right.
because
Yeah.
we all want things, right? We've all
Absolutely.
desired things,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
But just the desire of
Yeah.
wanting it doesn't guarantee us an opportunity to
You're
have it,
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. There's
right?
some causation there that has to accompany it, right?
Exactly, exactly. So how did I fall into this? Well, I had a childhood best friend that I did everything with. We
Hmm.
grew up, played, had fun, went to school together, grew up together, and he was kind of the um, awkward, unable to fit in. He was heavier set, right? He
Hmm.
wasn't very coordinated. He wasn't very agile. He wasn't as athletic, but he battled with obesity his whole life, right? And in that, there was a lot of unhealthy habits.
Right.
And I was the other kid, the athletic, the one that was great at sports, that was thin, right?
Yep.
That was
Right.
so just to paint a picture of what that looked. And I would encourage him throughout his our lives together. Look, let's go work out together. Let's do this.
Right.
As much as I knew and as much as I was influenced, because I quickly at a young age fell in love with health and
Got you.
exercise and
Right.
sports and just trying to be at my best,
Right.
right? I had several that influenced that passion in me. I remember being fascinated with bodybuilders and reading magazines and
Right.
just
Right.
fascinated with the
Yep.
body, right? With
Yep.
the ability of a body. And so fast forward, we split ways after high school. I
Okay.
moved to Miami. He
Hmm.
stayed in Texas.
Hmm.
And 3 years later, I got a phone call with some stunning news that he had passed away.
Mm.
And he had gotten so overweight, so obese, and was so desperate to get the weight off that he went to get a gastric bypass surgery, got an infection
Mm.
2 days later, and he died. Right.
Wow.
And in that moment, it was a sucker punch. It was,
Right.
a wake up call.
Right.
What happened? I was blaming myself. I became guilty. I was um,
Mm.
taking responsibility because I told myself I could have done more. I could have done more. Why didn't I do more? Why didn't I do more? Right. So about 8 months of that, of just
Right.
guilting myself,
Survivor's
I
guilt is
had,
what they call that. Eh?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. I had to quickly make a realization. And I had to accept the fact that there was not much more I could have done.
Right.
But what I did do in that moment is I made a commitment. I said, if I can help someone, and as long as I know of somebody that is going through the same thing that my best friend is went through, I want to make sure they don't end up like him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is how my journey started. Really looking at, well, how can one I become as
Hmm.
knowledgeable as I can with
Hmm.
what it is
Hmm.
surrounding this. So I was already in culinary arts. I was already in
Okay.
getting nutritional background, and I just deep dived into it. and I started to search, how can I help? How can I help
Yeah.
and be of service and be of service? And that's
Yeah.
kind of how this whole journey started, right? It kind of, I was taking, I like to say, I took a tragedy and made it into,
Or,
a
yeah.
passion and something positive. And 15 years later, I'm still committed to that, right? And I'm helping people with that. But I
Yep.
did learn a lot from his experience.
Okay.
And it really brought me to look at health and look at the weight release journey or weight loss journey
Yep.
in a totally different perspective.
Okay.
Because I believe we're missing a component, right? We're missing an element
Hmm.
that it's not that he didn't want to lose the
No.
weight.
Well,
It's
clearly
not that he
so
didn't put forth the
right.
effort,
That's
right?
right. No, I hear you. That's right. I was gonna say, like, he went through this procedure to help
Yeah,
him, right? So no, I
right.
hear you. Yeah.
The want is there. He
Yes.
he did as best as he could with what he knew, right?
Yes.
Like I would go with him to the gym. I'd take him to the gym. We'd do as much as we could, but it wasn't enough. And so I started asking myself, well, why? What's missing here? Right?
Right.
And when I started reflecting through my years of working with so many people, I realized that there was a common denominator there. There were two common denominators. It was people,
Hmm.
them, the person,
Yep.
and it was secondly food. And what I quickly understood is that the issue here is the relationship people have with food that is causing them to stay in the situation that they're in. So, what exactly does that mean? Look, we're in relationships every single day.
Yes.
We're in relationships with our friend, we're in relationships with your partner. If you're married, you're in relationships with your boss, right? And food is no different. We are literally in relationship with food every single day.
Yeah.
And based on how you adopted your relationship with food is
Yes.
how you're going to adopt your psychological understanding of food, which
Yes.
then is what you are going to live out.
That's right. That's right. Well, you're going to do what you know, and if
That's
that's
right.
all that you know, and unknowingly, if unknowingly that's all that you know, that's how
Yeah.
it's going to play out, and not recognizing. You talked earlier about habits as an example and
Yeah.
patterns that are adopted, right? If these
Right.
patterns or habits are negative, if you will, then
Yeah.
that's how it'll play out for you. And so I
Exactly.
hear that loud and clear, and I'm glad you touched on that. I do want to go back, David, to the point, and I think it's a significant point around taking tragedy. And first, my condolences, my friend. I know it's been quite some time, but
Thank
the
you.
fact that you continue to live out his memory through your work is phenomenal, and you should be commended for that. But I
Thank you.
absolutely love the fact that you, as you said, you've taken a tragedy and you've turned it into something. Right.
That's right.
And it didn't just rest with you and you were in this deep hole, if you will. And and that can easily happen. And in some cases, you almost can understand that it happens. But
Yeah.
to take that and grow and build yourself out the way that you did is phenomenal. I think that really is one of the key aspects of the story. So I appreciate you doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think it all comes down to choice and perspective, right?
Yes.
We could look at a situation and beat ourselves up for it and blame and kind of dwindle the circumstance, or we can look at, well, what can I learn from that? I
Yeah.
think every tragedy can bring us a lesson and it could bring us something to learn from,
Yes.
right? That can always enhance us and make us better, right? Like I wasn't directly impacted by how he lived his life, but
Right.
I was impacted by what happened to his life.
That's right.
So from that, I can look at, well, what can I gain from this and how can I learn something to then now take that with me and impact my life in a such greater way. And little did I know that his story was now going to turn into my life passion and everything that I do, right?
Yeah.
And it's crazy. I like to say how God does his things, It's
Mhm.
it's a great um experience when you are able to just be pliable and allow yourselves to be
Right.
flexible through every circumstance, right?
That's huge. I tell you, that's huge. Someone will call it resiliency, but it's actually what it is: being flexible in what's happening to you, and understanding that there's are things that can happen around us, to us, and we have to respond and react. And you talked about choice and perspective. I think those are all fabulous terms that help us in that decision making process.
Yeah.
David, I want to touch on you sort of talked a little bit about patterns and habits, and yes. I think that ties in nicely to something you spend a lot of time talking about, which is emotional stress eating, right? Emotional eating, if you will. I think that is probably. I have no idea the numbers. Maybe you do in terms of how many fall into that category that are impacted. By this, but it is a big. Again, it's a big one, and I think for some. We talk about the knowing, right? The unknowing, it's unknowingly happen. Like when I feel this way, I eat. Oh, maybe when I feel this way is when I get into these patterns. And so I'd love for you to sort of expand on that, because I think it's a big one, and an important one for a lot of people.
Absolutely. There was research done, and they found that 88% of Americans all admitted to be emotional eaters, right?
Pretty significant.
That's a large amount, right? And not only that, but when we look at, well, what is the danger behind this? Well, 74% of all overeating comes from emotions. And it is the leading cause of non-communicable diseases, which is producing 11 million deaths each year. Wow. Allow that to sink in. 11 million deaths each year being caused because of poor eating habits. And emotional eating is one of the leading ones.
And there's an aspect to it, and also other illnesses that don't necessarily lead to death, but things like diabetes and other other illnesses that affect our bodies and have an impact, right? So that number potentially could be higher based on what the individual is dealing with.
And death is an extreme. We might be saying, oh, well, David, you're really taking it to the extreme. Well, the extreme is there, but that doesn't mean that everything else isn't as significant. Living unhealthy, living with the side effects of it, right? Being depressed, right? Being with low energy, not being at your optimal, not being able to enjoy playing with your kids, not being able to have the ability to do things that you want to do in life, right? That's just as bad. I mean, I would almost say that can sometimes be worse. You're living out a life that you do not want. You're practically living in death.
Yeah.
Right.
Your quality of life is
your quality of life. That's right.
Not there. Yeah.
That's right. And now, so when we look at emotional eating, well, what is emotional eating? Without getting into the scientific side of it, we understand that it's basically going to food to deal with your emotions, right? You're releasing and you're using food for an intended source that it wasn't created for. When we look at this, well, to simplify it even more, it's learned behavior. We learned at some point in our life that one way to release our emotions is with food, to deal with our anger, to deal with our sadness, to deal with the stimulation of an emotion that we're feeling with food. And how did we learn that? We learned that from our childhood more oftentimes than not, right? The developmental years of our life, between being born to 7 years old, are the most foundational and critical component moments of our life.
They are.
And this is where we are looking at everything around us, and we're learning from everything. There's observational learning, right? There is habitual learning. There's different types of learning patterns that we receive, that we utilize as kids to learn from. And being that emotional eating is learned behavior, that means that I saw my mom probably deal with her emotions in that same way.
Right. Yeah.
Or it was introduced to me somehow. Let's say you come home from school one day, you had an argument with your friend, right? You're sad. Your mom sees you. She comes, she talks to you. She says, everything's going to be okay. But with that, she says, here, have this cookie so you can feel better.
Right.
In that moment is how the conditioning has begun.
Right.
In that moment is how we have started to subconsciously and neurologically started to build neurological connections, right? Forming neurological traits. And that now starts to become, if that pattern is repeated, If let's say we're through conditional learning, let's say we utilize food to reward somebody. Oh, he did great. Let's celebrate.
Right.
Let's give him a treat. Give him a cake, right? We now are conditionally taught to celebrate our wins with food.
Right. See, that explains my relationship with Twinkies. I get it.
Yeah. Right? So now imagine this. The more you repeat that pattern.
That's right. It just builds.
It now just builds. And now that is how we adopt our relationship with food, which then now forms our psychology with food. Yes. Right? Because it's now, this is how I view food. This is how I think of food. This is how I relate with food. This is how I feel about food, right? This is now my psychological understanding of food.
Right.
And as you get older, now those patterns just simply magnify.
And then it's become what you do, who you are. It just.
Thank you. You went on to the next point. Right. We then now adopt that out as our identity.
Right.
And we start to live out that life. Yes. Right. And then we hear statements as, well, that's just who I am. That's just how I deal with things. Right. I guess that's just how it is. I'm just an emotional person, whatever, so on and so on. We all hear these things. But when we go back, well, what is the issue here? It's that how we were introduced to food is the root cause of what is leading us to do the things that we're doing, and is giving us as a result the outcome of life we are living.
Right. No, I get it. It's clear, David. I mean, in terms of how it's connected, and I think the manner in which you've broken that down is really important, because you can literally see, if you start to trace back, and I joke about Twinkies. I've had a Twinkie in years, but I mean, the joke is when you kind of think back to other things and replace that Twinkie with a cookie, another habit, smoking, whatever. Like, you can kind of see where it starts, and it's often it's an act of feeling that triggers it. And then everything else falls into place. And oftentimes you're doing it and not even aware of what you're doing, because it's so deeply rooted into your subconscious.
That's right. And because it was taught, we learned it, and we repeated that pattern. What is behavior? It's just a sequence of of choices made over and over again in a specific order. That is why things happen automatically. We don't even think about. We've realized it when we're halfway done the bag of chips, right? When we finish some, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Right. And it's really important to assess this, because this is really the reason why obesity rate has tripled in America, right? 1 in every 3 Americans is considered obese in America, right? And I don't say this to knock on anyone, to be offensive towards anyone, or to shame anyone. It's simply to bring insight that when we are looking at this bigger picture of weight loss, right? What is causing it or producing it, we've got to be able to identify, where is this stemming from?
That's right.
Because that's going to give us awareness of ourselves. We live life 90% of the times not knowing anything about us.
Good point.
And if we don't have awareness about where things came from, what impacts the things that I do, right? My culture, my environment, my upbringing, the people that I've surrounded me with, the school system, right? Like, there's so many things that have influenced and shaped us. And if we don't understand that, and then we don't identify, well, what makes me tick? What circumstances are triggering me to do these behaviors? Because again, they're going to be linked to very similar things that happened in our childhood. Because again, there are formation, developmental years. So we need to identify what those are and why they trigger me. Because if we can identify what they are and why they happen, then again, it's going to give us insight about ourselves to be able to then take control and take back choice. Take back the power of choice.
Well, the part that I think about too, and let's take it a step further here, is, and you'll see people that people or individuals work really hard and they'll lose the weight and it goes back on.
That's right.
And sometimes it's even more. But I think if that insight was there, maybe they would understand why it was on to the first place, and that's the issue they can address. So it's great to go on a 6-week or a 6-month diet training program to get to this goal, and you jump on a scale and you're there where you are. I know you have some philosophy around numbers and scales, and we'll talk about that too. But to get on that, to get to that point, and then say, okay, great, I'm good now, and then go and you slip back in your old habits. You've just wasted the last 6 months. You haven't achieved anything if you haven't
addressed the root.
That's right.
All we're doing is we're masking this. We're learning something, but if we're not addressing the thing that is keeping me attached to what it is that's causing me to be here in the first place, it's all going to be temporary. That is why diets, do they work? Yes. Am I a fan of them? Sometimes, right? Sometimes they can work very well for people. Are they sustainable long-term? No. Are they sustainable for people's lifestyle or change? No. Why? Because it doesn't address the core root. Because when you now are able to change your relationship with food, right, and now adopt a different psychological understanding about food, you don't ever have to worry about having to live strenuous, restricted, or on a diet. Because your relationship with food is healthy.
Yes.
Right. In the same way you can have a healthy relationship with money, healthy relationship with your wife, a healthy relationship with your coworkers, right? The moment it starts to become unhealthy is the moment everything dwindles, right?
So then let's talk about what that, because now we've identified the issues, we garnered the insight, we've gained this knowledge. The next step is some sort of action, right? And so the relationship with food is a big one. How do we change the relationship with food?
We've got to first identify, am I happy with who I am today?
Okay.
If we aren't, we look at, well, what are the behavior patterns I'm doing that are keeping me in here? Then we've got to get very clear at what type of life we want. Because based on that life, there are things that person does, right? What type of habits do I want to have? What type of relationship would I like to have with food that is going to ultimately give me this life? We've got to get clear with this, who I don't want to no longer be and who I want to start to become, right? Because now you are able to invite and introduce who this person is going to start to become within you. Once we identify those things, then now it's about starting to make choices in line with who you want to become.
Yep.
Now, that means that when we have this insight, we're going to use all this insight, meaning I understand where it came from. I know what my triggers are, right? Yeah. I take it a step further and I look at, well, what is your emotional and physical response? Because everything within us has a response. When I am triggered, something's going to happen in me, right? And something's going to happen to my body physiologically.
Right.
Why is this important? Well, because it's going to become our alarm system. It's going to be our alert system that when I'm triggered, oh my gosh, I'm feeling it here. I know that when I feel it here, something's happened to me. Alert, alert, alert. Be careful because you might go to food.
Right.
Right. Why, again, is this important? We now start utilizing this to help us stop making the choices that we're making to adopt new ones. How? We got to make a new choice. If today, let's say you're dealing with emotions and you're releasing them with food, well, we have to make a different choice. What would you like to be doing? Right? And there's tons of things we can do. Sure. We can do breath work. We can walk. We can do exercise, right? We can listen to music. We can meditate. We can pray, right? It doesn't matter what we choose, but we have to choose a new behavior.
Yeah. So a replacement behavior of some sort to take the place of the food. And so
the current one. That's right.
That's right. So the whole idea. So you use walking as an example. You're now replacing it with a healthy behavior.
That's right. So we're replacing food with now walking, but now this is really how we now start to create and develop and form, right? These new connections, right? Because it's about in the doing of a new, I unlearn how to do something else.
Yes. Right.
So we literally, if we're looking at a forest and there's different trails within that forest, we want to desert this trail, that has been leading me to food and start crafting and building a new one. That means we're going to have to knock down trees. We're going to have to break down bushes and start creating. And how do we do that? Through repetition, right? So this is how it now starts, kind of just to give you a really fast forward look of how it all works when we start doing. I develop what I call the food behavior quadrant, and I break it down into four practical areas. We identify the cause, right? Which is the root. We identify your triggers and why they trigger you. We identify your physical and your emotional responses. Then we identify what are the coping actions that you're taking. What are the foods that you're going to, right? Because when we look at, it's not just all foods. It's probably a specific brand of chips, right? Why do we choose that? Well, it's probably, again, what was taught to you when you were young, right? Why is it the Twinkie? Why is it the Oreos, double stuffed Oreos, right? Why is it the Ruffles? So that's going to give us insight. Now we take all this information, and let's say you're on the street, you have something happen to you, you're in the mall, something happens, you get triggered, you identify, oh my goodness, I get this response in my body, I'm getting this urge, right? When that happens, now when we've identified a new behavior that we want to do, let's say walking, we're going to use what I call a power declaration system to start now changing our behavior pattern, one, through speaking and action taking. What does that look like? The power declaration goes like this. When I am triggered by blank, I no longer go to blank, but I do this instead. Right? So for example, when I am triggered because of stress, I no longer go to my Oreos, I go walking instead. And when you're triggered and that's happened, you declare that, but then in the moment, you perform the action.
That declaration, David, that declaration is so important. It's almost a commitment we make to ourselves or a reminder to ourselves, and we pull what it forces us to do. It takes us out of those subconscious automatic behaviors.
That's right.
And as that continues, and the more we do that, we talk about replacing that behavior with this new act. So if it's walking, then that's what it is. And I think that's the chopping down the forest and the trees that you're talking about, the trees in the forest. That's actually what 100%. You're doing here in this process. And I think it's amazing.
In psychology, that's known as stimulus response. What we want to do is we want to create a gap in between being stimulated and quickly responding or reacting. Right? So when we are able to recognize it, we stop. When we say this power declaration statement, we're literally creating that gap. So now what does that do? That interrupts our subconscious. That brings us back to being able to take control of our situation and take control of our doing.
It brings us present.
And then make a choice. What is it that you want to do? I don't want to go to food anymore because I know that's hurting me. Let's do this instead, right? And again, through repetition, our brain loves repetition. In the same way you repeated going to food that caused you to learn that, we're now going to, in that repetition, adopt this new behavior pattern. And now we change you neurologically.
Well, and the reality is, everyone experiences some form of stress, but they don't all respond to it the same way. And it's really what we're talking about is changing our response.
That's right. Because we're all emotional people. We have them. Right? It's not just, women are emotional. Look, men out there, we're just as, if not sometimes worse in certain areas, right? It's not a bias thing here, only for women, only. We all have them, but it's like you said, how do we deal with them? Because as humans, we all need coping mechanisms. We need them to stay alive, to stay sane. Otherwise, it would be a zombie apocalypse. We'd be killing each other every time, right? But it's really, what is the coping mechanism that we're choosing? So in this food behavior quadrant, we are literally learning how to take back the power of choice so that now you can start to choose. Because when we're under this behavior pattern, we're not choosing for ourselves anymore. The behavior pattern is choosing for us.
That's right.
The food is choosing for us, right? The trigger is choosing for us. Why? Because it's become automatic. It's just been ingrained. We don't even think about it. But in this, we're interrupting so that we can now start choosing, who do you want to be?
Gotcha.
Yep. What life do you want to have? And then asking ourselves, right, when these urges come, another question I love to ask is this choice you're about to make in line with who you want to be? If the answer is no, then are you willing to deal with the consequences that come from making this choice?
Right.
Because you have no one else to blame anymore but self, right?
Yes.
We no longer will point the finger, but we'll point the thumb at us, right?
That's it. That's it. Now, listen, I think those are great questions. And when you can force yourself to honestly and earnestly ask yourself and answer them too, I think that will kind of get you sort of on that path of where we're trying to be. And so I think that's a fabulous sort of psychological way of approaching it, because I think it's really, that's what we're talking about. There needs to be a clear psychological path that has reason in it. I think once you can see that reason, you can see the way as clear, and it doesn't seem as insurmountable. When people hear about weight loss, it goes, oh my gosh. But if you break it down to, like you said, I think that works. You touched earlier about not being a big fan of diets, if you will. I want you to talk about that, because that's oftentimes a go-to for many people, right?
Yeah. The reason I don't like them is because they're playing off of your emotions, right? They're introducing an unsustainable life, getting you to believe, because you're vulnerable, that this is all you need to do to change you. Because here's the thing, weight issues or unhealthy issues, it's not a weight issue. It's a you issue. It's not a physical issue. Right. It's a you. It's an identity issue. It's who you've learned to become because of what you are doing every single day.
Right.
So diets, they're not addressing that. They're giving you a quick fix solution that is only destroying you, because it is getting you to believe that if I can only do this, this is all I need to really be successful. That's not true, right? So they are making money off of your emotions, off of your vulnerability, setting you up to fail, because nothing that is restrictive, nothing that is absolutely contained, right, or limiting you to have to do a certain thing, if that what you're doing doesn't line up with your lifestyle, you're going to eventually fail. Right. It's that simple.
You can't. Sustainability is a word that comes to mind right now. It's important that you adopt things, you take on, you do things that can be sustained over the long haul, not just for this 6-month gap while I'm on this diet. Right.
That's right. And if think of how much different it would be if now you change your relationship with food, right? You can eat everything you love. There's no restrictions. But now you had a healthy relationship in how you did it. You understood the principles of nutrition that really are going to keep you in the life that you want and help you build that life. How much greater would that be? Instead of living restricted, giving up things, having to eat foods you don't love, having to do things that are just unrealistic, right? This is why all of my students never stop eating the foods that they love. Right? Because here's the reality. Look, it's this simple. You can have all foods.
Yes.
But when you understand that not all foods benefit you always,
right,
it's so much easy to make your choice and to be able to decide. When we've adopted the understanding of what is a healthy relationship with food look like, and how am I living that out each day?
Right. And that's a big one, because that again, that frames things very nicely for you. I also like the fact that we don't talk about being restricted, right? It's understanding, what the consequences of choices are. So if you want to have that Twinkie or that cookie or whatever, you're not saying not to, but just understand, what happens as a result of, or what you need to understand about eating that, making that choice.
And understanding that, look, I can have it if I want,
right?
But and I don't, when I have a healthy relationship with this Twinkie, I'll have it once a month and I'll be okay. Right. I don't have to sit there and eat the entire carton. Right. Because I don't know what that relationship is. It's an unhealthy one. So therefore I'm going to abuse everything that is unhealthy. You abuse it.
Yes.
Right. And when we simplify this concept, it is now so simple to live out your life without stress. Because look, when you're on a diet, look, you become stressed. So like, what's happening there? You have two different paradoxes here, right? You're doing a diet to release weight, but you're so stressed that like it's
Miserable and
triggering something
frustrated.
else to do something else, right? So it's like it's a double-edged sword, which really only leads to more pain and more destruction.
Right. Yeah. And if something's supposed to be good for you, it shouldn't feel that bad.
Yeah.
Not supposed to,
because when you're restricted, look, you then adopt the mentality of rarity. What does that mean? Now this food becomes rare. If I'm restricted and I can't have this at all because it's a bad thing, it's bad for me, it's bad. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be drawn to it even more because now it becomes rare. So now I'm going to crave it more. I'm going to want it more. I'm going to binge on it easier. I'm going to go to it more often. But when I now look at, okay, it's all there, it's all available for me, it's not going to go away, right? It's not going to disappear and no longer be available for me.
Yeah.
And I can now have this healthy relationship with it, right? I can have some chips. I can have some pizza. I can have the things that are not necessarily things that we should be eating every single day. They're absolutely fantastic. They taste great, right? My go-tos I love are pizza and hot Cheetos, right? And then you put the hot Cheetos on top of the pizza, right? It's even better. But I don't do that all the time.
Correct.
There's a healthy relationship with it.
That's correct.
And now that allows me to be able to live life, enjoy all things, and still be healthy and fit, living the life that I desire.
Yeah, no, again, it really goes, your messaging and work around the relationship with food is so important, understanding why we go to the foods we go to in these particular moments. I think for a lot of people that in itself is groundbreaking. I got to ask the sort of, what the clients that you're working with, because you work with, is it primarily females or you work, it's open to anyone? And so what that, I guess what I'm imagining, David, is that there's a sense of joy when you help people reach their goals and you help people get to where they want to be. That feeling must just blow you to the moon and back then.
They're all types, right? I have people from their young 20s to their 60s and plus, right? Men, women, all types of backgrounds, all types of lifestyles. And the beauty of it is because it impacts everyone in the way that everyone eats food. I have the opportunity to connect with everyone because whether you want to gain weight or release weight, there's one common denominator: food. And you. Right?
I was going to say you, but food, you're right.
Food and you. And so that's the beauty of it, that I'm able to connect with so many men and women, look, from actors to models to, blue collar workers to corporate executive and business owners, right? And they're all wanting that, striving to live the life that they desire, right? And living their best life. So it's fantastic. And now I think COVID did, at least for me in this business, a phenomenal thing for us in a positive way, because now I connect with so many people virtually, and all the coaching that I do is virtually, right? All of my training and coaching systems are all online and people can connect with it. And now this just allows anyone from any lifestyle to be able to do this and take control of their own life. It's fantastic.
Oh, I love it. No, I love it. I think that the work you're doing is incredible. And I mean, going back to the very beginning, what started you with the loss of your friend is a phenomenal way to live out his memory and live out, that commitment that you made to his memories. That's phenomenal. So David, this has been a really, really, really great chat and lots of learning and lots of insights. And I appreciate you for being here. I do want to ask you one last sort of question, if you will, just around the work you do, more specifically, the significance of time and being patient. I think for many, their weight gain journey didn't happen overnight, but the expectation that the weight loss happens quicker than it went on, and it doesn't work that way. I want to sort of talk about just sort of the significance in allowing time and being patient with the journey.
When you understand, again, back to what I said, that it's really a you situation. We're now able to take the anxiety of the pressure of having to get a specific result, because it no longer goes chasing a result. Now it's, I'm going to live my best life, and I am now going to be able to craft that.
Right.
If we can adopt that mentality, that understanding, it now becomes about the process and the journey versus how fast can I lose weight.
Right.
Because when you work on self and we change you, and we start to identify the things that I mentioned earlier, and we start to change your psychological understanding, we now are going to be amazed that the weight's going to take care of itself.
Yeah.
The energy is going to take care of itself, right? The building muscle is going to take care of itself. Not meaning that it's going to happen on its own. Like, we're putting in the work for it, right?
Yes.
We're
Yes.
taking the actions for it, but we eliminate this anxiety and this pressure that I now have to gain or release this amount of weight in this amount of time. And that's exactly what diets do, right? That's why they set people up to fail, because they put this drive on, wow, we got to get it down as fast as possible. Okay, great. But then what happens when it all comes back on and more, right?
That's right. That's right.
But when we have patience and we fall in love with process and we understand really what we're building here, what we're doing, that we're working on you, so you no longer have to deal with this again. What good is it to chase diets to try to release the weight and end up losing it, gaining it all back again, right? And living this life for the rest of your life.
Right. And
But
you get on this hamster wheel, right? You get on this hamster when you go and you go and you go, and you're repeating cycles, because as we talked earlier, the behaviors, they're still subconsciously implanted in our minds, and we're not thinking about,
we're not rooted.
Right? Absolutely, they're not going nowhere.
No. So when we work on ourselves and we adopt this relationship of knowing, while I'm working on myself, I don't ever have to deal with this again. I don't ever have to worry about going back to the old habits. I don't ever have to worry about living restricted again, living on a diet again. None of my students will ever hear and never know what it's like to live under a diet again.
Right.
You now identify and are able to tap into freedom, and you now live versus trying to survive, right? Understanding that everything in and around weight issues or health issues is a psychological problem, right? Which is why now you're hearing, like, for example, you're hearing about Noom, right?
Yes.
They're now talking about, oh, lose the weight the psychological way, right? Things like that, because now they're starting to understand, oh, crud. Yeah, it's not just about dieting and exercising. There's a deeper issue here, right? And I'm just so grateful that I've learned this. I've been able to get this revelation about this and be able to share this, and something that I've been doing for the past 15 years.
Well, the sharing
part, continue to do.
Well, no, that's phenomenal. And the sharing part is the piece that gets me excited. The fact that it's not like I acquired this information and I'm good with it. It's like, okay, how much people can how other people can I positively impact and change lives in the way you have? So again, Dave, I got nothing but respect and love for what you're doing, and congratulations. It's so awesome. For our listeners who are out there who've been enjoying our every word and hanging on to what we've been talking about here, I wonder if we could tell them, if they want to catch up with you or learn more about your work, where can we send them?
Yeah, a couple of options. You can go to my website, davidhernandez.co. That's davidhernandez.co. That's my website. You want to connect, you want to have a conversation, we can have that there. They can link with me on all social media platforms under my handle at Dave K. Hernandez. Dave K. Hernandez. They can reach out there, and they can also catch my podcast. I talk a lot more about this. Again, this is valuable. It's just free insight. I'm a giver of value.
Yes.
I want to give value and give you insight. And you can catch that on all your favorite podcast stations. You can find that on YouTube as well. That's Listen, You're Not Defeated. Listen, You're Not Defeated is the name of the podcast. And you can even just search my name on YouTube, David Hernandez, and you can find me there. We just did a 2-day conference. It was called First Sleep to Better Health.
Okay.
And it was a 2-day conference where we broke down everything that I use with my students to help them, like, put an end to all the things that we talked about today. This past weekend, it was fantastic. And this is something that I'm going to be building out further. I want to travel with this, go to different cities and different states. Again, this is a way that anyone can join in and just continue to get value. So I'm excited about that moving forward.
Oh, it's amazing. I think that's awesome. David, this is great, man. Thank you so much for what you're doing and continue to do. And congratulations on success, man. You're doing valuable work, which is very much in line with what you're wanting to offer. So congratulations.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me on your show, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep crushing, impacting people. And if there's anything I can do to support, please reach out.
Appreciate you. I'll keep doing my part as long as you keep doing yours, David.
Amen to that.
Back we are here on the podcast. I got to send out a big shout out and thanks to David for being here and sharing his viewpoints and insights on a different approach to weight loss and the things that we can do to achieve our weight loss goals. You know, so much of it goes back to breaking those patterns that he talked about, and then as well our relationship with food. So really two good points. And so thank you, David, for being here. You know, when I think back to my conversation with him, he really left us with a lot of great points. But if there's just one thing that I would take away from our chat, it would be this. With so much of our daily actions being as automatic as they are, patterns of behavior are super easy to fall into. And one of the main reasons why we fail to achieve our goals is that we fail to build the right habits to get us to where we want to be. You know, look, we all have desires and wants, but that's not enough to get what we're after. You know, we have to take specific actions to get there. And that may involve an examination of our patterns of behavior. Because if it's the patterns and habits that we follow every day that prevent us from making the necessary changes needed to achieve our goals, then it only makes sense that we take the necessary reaction and build our awareness of what these habits and daily behaviors are. You know, really it comes down to a few simple changes that will help us make spectacular and audacious results. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, please know that you can do so simply by heading over to audaciouslife.com, and all you've got to do is enter in your email address and you'll be alerted every time we got brand new content that comes out. We've reached the end of another episode of the podcast, and as always, I want to extend a shout out and thanks to our Audacious listeners and all those lovers of Audaciousness. Your support is greatly appreciated. So thank you. If you are checking this out on your favorite podcast listening platform, we love comments, we love ratings, so certainly I'd ask that you do so. 5 stars are preferred, but I'm not trying to twist your arm here. Please go with what you think makes sense. And again, I want to send my thanks and appreciation. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.